You guys, well, I guess you guys are cool with me recording. I guess I should start with that. But
Hmm.
welcome everybody to another Open Game Day of the Office Hours. The Open Game Day community is an NSF-funded research incubator, bringing together a collective of researchers who are interested in the use of data in and around games to advance our scientific understanding of thinking, learning, and decision making. And we've got two main goals in this community. One is to collect sort of best practices and sort of a body of knowledge around how people actually do this kind of work. And then the second is to ultimately turn that body of knowledge into hard research infrastructure that other people can use and make it easier to replicate our approaches. Got a bunch of resources that already exist. The field day team at Wisconsin kind of has the prototype version of the website that we envision something like this happening. We have a Slack channel where we all communicate and coordinate. And then we have these open office hour sessions. So how these sessions typically work is they're inspired by a set of sessions that used to happen here at Carnegie Mellon, where somebody who's a PhD student or a grad student or something would usually present on some project they were working on, and they would talk to a member of the statistics faculty. Um, and essentially they'd treat it like as if it was an office hours. It's like, here's all my code, here's all my research questions, here's like what my data looks like and stuff. But they would do it publicly. So you could sit in that audience, you could see how do experts work through problems, how do they talk about stuff, and what are they working on. Um, the idea is we kind of do that. We want to see how are people working through their process, how are they working through their problems, what kind of things are they doing, and we record the sessions to make it more valuable to the broader community. So some things to keep in mind is people doing these presentations are often presenting stuff that's not done yet, or things that are in progress, or things they might not 100% be fully committed on. So keep that in mind. It takes some courage to do that. But also we're here to help everybody involved. So if you got a question, somebody brings something up you don't know, feel free to raise a hand, ask a question. We can figure out how to move forward together. And what I'll do then is turn off or hand off to our presenters over at Field Day, Luke and Yuheng, and you can talk about your Viz project.
All right. Is my screen going? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction. My name is Yuheng. I'm on the Field Day Labs Open Game Data team, and here's Luke with me.
Hey everyone. I think most people who will watch this have probably seen or heard from me before, but I'm Luke. I'm also on the Field Day data team, um, and help run things here and built a lot of our underlying infrastructure. And today we're going to talk about one of the things we've built on top of a lot of that infrastructure.
Awesome. Yeah. So to kick this off, some of you might already be familiar with this, but I just wanted to go over the kind of the overarching theme of what we're building, how it ties into the entire endeavor of open game data. So up until this point, the open game data pipeline is capable of, taking gameplays from educational games, turn them into events, and use aggregators to process them into features at various levels. That includes, population level data, player, down to the most specific session level. And that made us think that what would be the logical next step to provide tooling for visualization and analytics, which led us to think about building a dashboard for exploration of the data. Because if without proper tooling, we would resort to using basic standard tools like Excel, which is like pretty inefficient and doesn't really allow us a way to nicely present our data. So we went ahead to try a bunch of existing tools to build these visualization dashboards. And throughout different iterations, we've tried three different tools. The first is Looker Studio by Google, which is nice in a way that is highly interactive and it lives on the web. So no installation is required, and it's pretty easy to share it with other colleagues. But there's also drawbacks with a small variety of visualization types to select from, and the rigid data requirements. You have to pretty much do the data cleaning and processing first before you can really start to view anything. So that had its own challenges. And then the team moved on to using Jupyter Notebook. As you may be pretty familiar, is this very open Python-based tool that supports visualization in the notebook. So obviously the nice thing about it is you have full control over the visualization, and you can also do data processing natively, which is nice. But when it comes to presentation, it's not that great in the sense that it tend to have visual clutters. So if you're facing an audience that's not necessarily researchers or who are familiar with coding, a lot of it might look like jargon, and therefore the experience during those discussions is not that great. Also, for people that processes these data, they have to understand Python at a pretty, I would say, advanced level to produce meaningful data visualizations. And then we moved on to Tableau Public, which is Salesforce's tool for building dashboards. And the nice thing of it is has supports a larger variety of chart types, and it supports calculated fields, which is this programmable way to create your own aggregations. But the performance, at least with the public version, the free version, is not great when the dashboard gets very large, especially with cross filtering being applied. And also, it's not exactly an intuitive platform to use. So people on our team had to really study how to use it to really even perform the basic tasks, building bar charts and histograms and the likes. And overall, we believe it's more, a tool that's built for presentation in like formal business settings rather than a tool for quick exploration, which led us to, if we put things down onto this kind of four-quadrant chart, you can see that they have their benefits and drawbacks for each of the tools we've tried. And it's really calling for something that can land in this fourth quadrant or third quadrant, I should say, that kind of takes care of both usability and it's still versatile. So that led us to think about, what would be a visualization tool that, fits our specific needs, which is a tool for educational gaming. And certain things emerged during our discussions. So in our settings, it seems like there's more often a demand both from our researchers and game designers that we want to have a tool that supports quick exploration. You don't need to, worry about the finishing touches to make charts look nice. You can just load the data and it's fast. It presents basic charts right away. And it also supports different types of visualization. So in some of the tools that I showed you guys earlier, it supports a fixed set of tools and charts. And if you want to use something that is self-built, you can do that in Jupyter Notebooks, but not necessarily in Tableau or in Looker Studio. So our tool wants to be more open than that. So if you're a researcher, you want to do a very specific type of visualization, for example, that has to do with player progressions, and you want to use a graph format, we want to be able to support that. And then the interface should be intuitive, easy to use without much tutorialization, which calls for a simple setup, powerful, but still like not a lot of visual clutter, and it's pretty intuitive of the user flow, etc. And then needs to be fast, responsive, even if you have a lot of different charts in your dashboard. And then it supports multiple levels of aggregation, meaning what I stated earlier about open game data structure being multi-leveled. You have population, player, and session level data. So if the multiple levels are supported at the same time, I think it would be really suitable for our use cases. And then sharing, which is also something that we run into, being able to create a dashboard and present that and also sharing that with your colleagues and other members of the team to look at. And we decided to also not require any coding knowledge so that it's easier to circulate and onboard people, and it ties into, the intuitivity of and ease of use of this tool. Which led us to our take. So this is a screenshot of the actual tool, and we call it the Open Game Data Visualization Dashboard. Not being very explicitly creative here, but I think it does a good job describing what this does. So I'm gonna switch over to the live demo of this tool. And this part, it's going to be pretty interesting because Luke and I will sort of do a little role play, as if we are actually, discussing about a game and derive insights from the data. So the game we are going to talk about is called Headlines and High Waters. It's a game produced by Field Day Lab. It's a choose your own adventure game that tries to educate our audience about, doing local event journalism. And what we try to understand is from our game data is, first cover the basics. How much time do players spend in the game? How far they have been in terms of levels? And then there's this unique feature of the game that players can choose to level up on different attributes, and that will eventually affect whether they succeed or do better in the game or not. So we want to see if it's how players are behaving in that, and if that matches our designers' design about what attributes to emphasize on. And we'll also take a look at player progression, which is how people are traversing through the game. So let me switch to, okay, this part. And you're looking at this, the actual dashboard itself. So as you can see, I've already built out part of the dashboard, loaded the data set and have the basic statistics showing up. You can see there's the number of players, their active play time as a histogram, and then how far did players go.
Yeah.
All right. So Luke, you have what do you think?
Yeah. So the way that we're sort of thinking about this, and one of the major use cases for the tool is thinking about looking at data in conjunction with game designers. So that's sort of one half of what we want to support with this tool is for game designers to be able to look at the data that's coming out of their games and make informed decisions about, did we meet our targets with this game design? Are players playing the game that we intended? And so just at a first glance here, the questions that we usually have right away are just how many people are playing the game, how far are they getting, how long does it take? This game in particular, I think was made, it was designed to take, I believe, roughly one class period. So 30 to 40 minutes is intended to be the time it takes to play through the full game. And so even just having these first couple of charts here, we can sort of sanity check, how long is it taking players to get through the game. And it looks here like we've got a little bit of a bimodal distribution, but it looks like there's a lot of players, a little 1,200 seconds to a little bit more. So somewhere in the ballpark of 20 minutes. And then sort of another bunch of people around 3,000 seconds, which turns out to about 50 minutes. So most of our people that are engaging with the game for some amount of time are getting somewhere into it. It looks like they're playing 20 to 50 minutes, which sounds about right.
Yeah,
validates our assumptions about.
Yeah,
Is this the same data set across these cells? Because it's just my at a glance summation of the totals of those bars does not give me 847.
Yeah, it does not because I already did the filtering out
Okay.
yeah, you try this.
Oh, I see. I see. Yep. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
that looks more
So
like what I would expect a
Okay.
graph of human
that
players
may
to look like. That still
that
doesn't look like 847 though.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, they are at different levels. So at the top one is at the population level, I believe.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
Hmm.
it's possible that that our population level numbers are borked. But yeah, that player count is from the population level data set.
oh,
And all of this other, like all of our distributions are based on the player level
actually, let me.
graph.
Okay. Sorry, there was a.
Oh, was there another that okay, that looks a lot closer to something in the hundreds.
Uh,
And that pre-any filtering looks a lot more like what I would expect a public free game to look like.
Yeah.
Um,
mhm. Yeah. Okay. So what happened was I had a global filter applied on the player level data set, and since it's on the player level, it didn't affect the population number. So that's why there was a discrepancy. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So now we're back to our raw numbers and okay, so
Do you want
a whole bunch of people who play for under 20 minutes. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then things kind of tail off with most people being done somewhere between 4 and 6,000 seconds, which puts us like maybe a little over an hour then. So that's potentially some insight into just is our game meeting its target for how long players play? Well, maybe not. Maybe it takes more than what we intended. Uh, the next thing that we'd probably like to look at is like how are players actually engaging with the game? So like are they across the population of players in a choose your own adventure game where everything's based on choice, like are players making different choices? How much of the different sort of space of the game is actually being seen by the players.
to?
Um,
Yeah, we do have a feature for that. It's called player progression. Let me quickly pull that up so we can look at it together. Um, Let me make this larger. Yeah.
and so for a peek behind the curtain here, this is one of the first things that Yuheng built with us. So this is our tool for looking at uh, how players progress through a game. For this particular game, because it's a choose your own adventure kind of thing, there's sort of this hub and spoke structure.
mhm.
So as players are going through and they've got different stories to report on, they'll have these moments where they've got a certain amount of time to spend on different activities as they try to obtain different quotes, different images that they assemble together into a story. Um, and one of the things that's useful about this then is we can sort of see how players overall are moving through the game. So I think if we follow this all the way out kind of to the bottom left here,
Mhm.
um,
What
so,
determines
so
length?
hmm?
Like, why is that one so long?
I I think that's just an artifact of the
The force simulation.
The
yeah, the
tree shaker?
force space algorithm that we've got. So length doesn't necessarily mean anything. Size and thickness, like the size of the nodes, the thickness of the arrows, does carry meaning. The actual lengths, though, and distances are just an artifact of that's what the force algorithm decided should be the spacing. It is interactive, so you can move things around and adjust the spacing and everything. It sort of dynamically updates. Um, yeah, so a couple of things about the game's structure then is early on, um, your first job, your first story is relatively constrained. It's not quite a tutorial, but it's pretty close, and it's just getting players onboarded onto like how to play the game. And then there's a second story that I believe sort of expands a little, gives the player still a fairly safe area that doesn't have too much downstream effect, um, but gives them a little bit more choice. Then I
What
believe
are
that
the
there's, oh, sorry, what was that?
what are the orange things? Are they like
Oh,
individual lines of dialogue, or like if I designed this game, would I know what those are, or would those just look like artifacts to me?
yeah. So the fact that those look like random text is an artifact of a bug in the logging code itself. So there are human readable versions of names for those nodes. What those nodes represent are the individual choices you might make from a particular hub. So you might be told, all right, here are 6 different things that you could do to try and collect your information for this story. Like take pictures, interview this person, talk to the DNR. Um, and so these orange nodes, the leaves here are the individual concrete sort of tasks that you can pick. Um, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
but I don't get any kind of ordering of those. It's just like I did. Like, how do I kind of reason about like looking at the arrive at flood site one? Uh, one of them is thicker.
Yep.
Is that mean like more people did that one? Are they exclusive? Can I only do one, then I go back? Like,
Yeah. So the thicker lines indicate more players making that choice. Um, the number of choices that you have is not fixed. There will be a fixed amount of time that is spendable, and then each choice will have a certain cost associated with it. So some players might take, 4 15-minute tasks, and another player might choose 2 half-hour tasks. Um, what we don't support yet here is a way to look at a single individual player's progression through here. We've so far just got this aggregate view of across all the players in the data set, what were the nodes that they visited um, within the game. So we don't have a sense of ordering here for those individual orange nodes. What we do have is a reasonable ordering of the blue nodes, at least in terms of moving between different jobs. Um, so you can see that there's like that really small blue node, tell the shop owner to leave the cheese and run. I don't remember that one. I must have never gone down that little rabbit hole in the game. Um, there's a few of those where when you spin off into an individual interview, and that becomes its own little hub within this model. Um, but across the structure of the game, there's sort of the biggest blue nodes represent the starting points of um, any given story that you're working on.
and
And
so in terms of
how
the
sh
data itself, where does the blueness and the origin that's come from? Like, is that predefined in the
Um,
data? Do you have to, like, would that come from varying levels of the 3000 code? Like,
yeah.
I was
So
wondering how, same question, I was wondering how I could think about that generalizing to other games. Because here the blue
yeah.
nodes all connect, the orange nodes seem like they just terminate. Um, yeah. So how do you think about those?
So the currently, the visual encoding is defined at that like feature aggregation level. We've got plans to make that something that would be configurable just within the dashboard itself. Right now, that specific mapping of a value to an attribute of the node is being defined earlier in the pipeline. But then across games, so just like to give an example though of how this generalizes to different games, here, the only thing that really matters is how many players did each thing. So really all of our encodings, the size of the nodes, as well as the thickness of the lines, is just how many players did this. But in a game like Wake, for example, this graph looks way different. There we're mapping out how players are moving between different jobs. And we're also interested in that case in how long it took on a particular job. And we're also interested in both starting a job, but then whether you actually completed the job or quit and hopped onto something else. So in that case, the visual encodings are a little bit different. I think we used like size to represent how much time you spent at a given node, where one node is one job in the game.
Color for completion,
Yeah,
percentage completion.
yeah.
And where would I set that in this menu, or do I need to have, or do I need to have made all those decisions about my data before I import it into this tool?
Currently, yes. Right. So right now, those are being defined when you create the data, and the tool is just sort of naively reading that in as part of the data. But future version of this, that'll become something configurable. I think we've got plans somewhere in the roadmap to make that like a user configurable thing, so you can pick your own mapping.
Yep.
Yeah. Other questions about this piece specifically? All right, cool. So yeah, so then I think the other like high level thing here that we do get that's kind of nice is that we do recover pretty well the structure of the game. So in that sort of zoomed out view, um, like I was saying, the first I keep thinking of the word job because now my brain has spent so much time in Wakeland. The first story, um, like I mentioned, is pretty focused, and the graph itself sort of reflects that. You get into that first story after the tutorialized introduction. Then there's that long arm that is mostly just an artifact of the algorithm, but it does also reflect this sort of bridge moment in the game where you go from those first couple of uh, relatively constrained stories into the later stories that where the results of your reporting significantly affects which of, I think, 3 endings you get. And so as we follow this along, we get smaller and smaller nodes because there's fewer and fewer players, and that sort of reflects what we saw in those histograms of how far into the game players are getting. But we also see things branch out a lot more, and that's indicating to us that in fact our players are exploring all of the different sort of space of decisions and choices that can be made within the game. And things become more and more of a rat's nest, which is by design because that just reflects the amount of choice that becomes available later and later into the game. And so that has been sort of a tool that's helped, from a game design perspective, helped us to sanity check that there aren't certain parts of the game or certain decisions that are like never explored. Another
Well, actually, to the thing you just said,
Mhm.
how could you use this to determine a point of the game that was never explored? Because presumably it wouldn't show up in the graph, right? Like
Yeah,
would it be? I mean, like you could in principle plot it as like an orphan, but you would need to know it exists in the first place.
yeah.
Uh,
And so right now that's kind of dependent on looking at it with a developer who's familiar enough with the game to say, but what about this one? This isn't showing up in our graph.
mhm.
Um, another um, another plan for the future is to um, not sure yet at which level of the data processing. We do have some metadata from the game that fully lists out, at least for Wake, we have something that fully lists out all of the different tasks and jobs. And I think that there are plans in place to produce something similar for this game, uh, which then could be integrated into the graph to say, here's uh, yeah, anything that was like an orphaned node, given that we have data about the game itself, that we can pull in as part of either the analysis code or part of what's displayed visually at the dashboard level. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so the other sort of interesting thing about the game was those player attributes that we mentioned. So throughout the game, certain choices that you make will influence your attributes, and those are things like technical skills, like how good you are at using technology to collect information. There's an attribute that is effectively community trust in you as a reporter, and various other attributes that all kind of relate to journalistic practices. And when our games team was developing this in conjunction with journalism, like professors, like people who were involved in teaching the practices of journalism, there were a couple that came up as sort of interesting. So that trust one was like really important in the game design. Where the idea was that they really wanted people to come away from this game understanding the importance of building trust when you're working in journalism, especially in sort of a present societal environment where like trust in institutions and trust in media is sort of in crisis. And so that was something that they wanted to emphasize through this game. On sort of the other end of the spectrum, there was this endurance attribute, which was, I think, a little bit more playful, a little bit more for fun, but it's one of those things where you don't intuitively like look at journalism and think of it as like this physically intense job, but that in fact, when you're out spending all day interacting with people and moving around, going to different locations, like it actually is important to take time and like stock up on some snacks before you head out for the day. And that was something that they wanted to come through as well, that there's more to it than just the direct interactions of interviewing people and so forth. And then thirdly, we'll sort of throw in the research attribute, your skills at research, just as something that unlike the other two, isn't really this underrated aspect. I think everyone sort of thinks of journalists and thinks, oh, well, yeah, of course you should be good at doing background research on your stories. And so, based on just kind of those three as interesting ones to look at, what we'd like to see from the game is that players are needing to build up all three of their attributes, but that most importantly, they would be building up that trust attribute. And that would give us some assurance that the game is exposing players to all of these different important parts of journalism, but then also by design, emphasizing the importance of trust building. So it'd be cool if we could take a look at some of the data related to those attributes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me create another chart. So we do have at the player level some features that addresses that. Let me search up we'll call it player attributes. Where we have the statistics for endurance. Let me just duplicate them so I can create the ones for research, and you mentioned tech, right? Or trust, sorry, trust.
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. So just at a glance, looking at everybody who played, the distribute. So what this is telling us is for each player, when that player finished playing the game at whatever point they stopped playing, where was each of these attributes at? What level was each attribute? Um, and so initially here we're looking at everybody, which includes the players who dropped out right away, and maybe they aren't too interesting. So what would probably be helpful is to start filtering this data down to look at players who got further into the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. How about we filter by the quit level?
Yeah, so we've got our numbers up that tell us how many players quit on each given level. So what would be interesting is if we sort of slowly drop out more and more players from the bottom, and if we look at how the distributions shift, that should tell us a bit about what actually was important to getting further and further into the game. So if we drop out, so far we've dropped out the players who quit like within that first story,
Mm-hmm.
who did very little at all. And it looks pretty reasonable so far. Like the distributions here are all still around the same. So let's start dropping out players who quit
Well,
one story in.
the distributions are around the same shape, but they are not the same because the y-axes are very different.
Sure, yeah. Similar shapes, yeah.
The middle one is way more kurtotic. It just doesn't look like it.
Yeah, that's true. Um,
uh,
yeah, and so as we've dropped out some players, the distribution that sort of shifts the most, where the center is interestingly enough, is endurance. So by the time we get to players who reached the end game, which is what quit on level 6 means, you at least reached the end game. Maybe you quit before the game itself actually ended, but you got into the final state. You got through all of the jobs. What's kind of interesting there is pretty quickly you see players who didn't ever work on endurance didn't make it very far. There's very few players who made it to the end without getting at least a 4 or higher on their endurance. Uh, Whereas trust, on the other hand, there's proportionally a relatively high number of players who got to the end without increasing their trust attribute at all. Um, and so that's a little bit concerning.
is
Uh,
this largely a player choice kind of thing? Because like each of these plots does show that you can get to the end without ever touching the attribute
yep.
because there are still zeros.
Yep.
Uh,
So there's, by design, it is largely about player choice. You are not necessarily told explicitly which choice will change what. Um, and there's some difference in the number of opportunities that you have, which is somewhat reflected in, how wide does that x-axis get. But generally, by design of the game, these are reflective of the player choices.
but like you can't like fail out based on having one of these attributes be too low.
You there are a few moments in the game where you can fail out with something too low, and it will just set you further earlier in the game, like
Does that count as
back
a
to a better
quit
place to
though?
continue from.
Does that count as a quit though, or would that not show up as a quit unless they actually stopped playing?
Yeah, for what this quit level here means, that means the point at which you exited the game. So that won't count as a quit here. I think that we've got a feature that covers fails. In my head, I'm like trying to remember which stuff we did in Bloom and which stuff we did in Headlands and High Water. But I believe that we've got separate events that say when you got bumped back because you failed.
Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering here, like, is there a dominant strategy of one of these attributes you should focus on more than the others? Given
Yeah,
that trust ends up looking relatively normally distributed, it sounds like optimizing trust actually isn't game
Yeah.
necessarily strategic. Whereas
Yep.
endurance, there seems to be a shelf, meaning focusing on endurance is probably strategic within the reward system of the game.
Yeah. And
Uh,
that right there is sort of the interesting insight, I think. Given that that was not what was intended in how the design team was thinking about what they wanted to be important. But there was sort of this open question in the discussions, and this is a similar thing to what we found in our discussions with them, was that this was definitely counterintuitive to what they were expecting or what they were designing for. And it helps to reveal potentially an imbalance then, yeah, in the fact that it looks like you kind of need at least that much endurance to get through the whole game.
mhm.
So I quite like this filtering mechanism where you can just select the bars to dynamically filter all of the charts. Can you select bars across multiple charts? Like if we click on the 0 bar for trust at this right now, if we only select that one, okay, so now we can see the people who didn't do any trust, this is what they did with their other stats.
Yep.
Um,
But
that's pretty
also we
cool.
see that the people with zero trust. Oh, and is it a dual constraint? Is constraining off of the quit out and the trust at the same time?
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
So there are some people who made it to the last level with 0 in all of their stats.
In these
What's up
three,
with those two people that clearly quit incredibly early, but somehow still quit out on 6?
huh?
The two on the far left of the timing plot.
Yeah, that's
Um,
interesting. I wonder if let's see, August 2025, last year, August. It's possible that
is this
maybe
developer data?
that some developer data slipped in. Yeah, because usually they play on a different branch, but I guess I don't know if we like filtered on which branch they played on here or not.
Is
Um,
it possible to load into the middle of the game, like by loading up a save file or a player prep or something, and then
yeah, s- yep. So you can this does have that player code system where you can resume a game. It might be then that those are players who had already played prior to when, like, whichever date range, like prior to the start of August. I know that when we pull this data, any sessions that continuously carried over from like the previous day are included, but we don't necessarily go back and pull a bunch of player data, like previous sessions. Uh, the the backtracking is just at the level of making sure we have complete sessions, not complete player data. So that might be what we're seeing there.
So the data we're looking at here, is this all, these are their stats at their moment of quit?
Yep.
Or, okay. So
Um,
so we have, so some data in here is stats at the moment of exit. Other data like the progression through the nodes in the graph we were looking at earlier, that's the entire progression that they experienced before the moment of quit. Is that right?
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you filter on that too, on the
yeah,
progression?
or is that getting filtered by these?
Like
Um,
if we look at the graph again, is
y-
it
Not at the moment.
yeah.
Yeah,
okay?
since the cross filtering only applies across one particular data set, and these are actually two data sets, like
Hmm.
same
Ah,
game, same date range, but at different levels. So this one reflects the population, and this one is sliced by players. So
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
yep.
So like what I would sort of say is happening there is we mentioned that it was like important that we wanted to be able to work across different these different levels of aggregation. And so what we have so far is that ability to have multiple different data sets represented together side by side, which I think is pretty cool. Like we can even, if we wanted to, we could pull in data from a different game on the same dashboard on its own chart. So like not that there's much useful that would happen from that like right now, but hypothetically, if you were doing a study of like a common construct across games that might be kind of fun. But what that really does is it just sort of unlocks us to start thinking about, okay, how can we hop back and forth between these? And what are sort of the emergent effects of trying to put this data side by side? And the tricky thing about doing stuff at the population level is at that point, you don't have a concept of individual player. So right now, that population level progression chart is aggregated from the get-go. So there is no way to dice that up. As we're thinking about that, we're going to be thinking about ways of could we do that same graph, but could we make that final level of aggregation happen within the dashboard tool here so that it's pulling from the player level aggregations to display an aggregate. At that point, it would become subject to all the other filters that we do at the player level.
I wonder, are you aware of the inspect tool?
Yeah,
This is
Jimmy
yeah,
Tan
yeah,
out at
Jimmy,
YouTube
yeah.
Ventures. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, because it does a lot of these sorts of things. And I really like the dashboard kind of layout here where you could like mix and match things. I could very easily see borrowing some of the plots and analyses that Jimmy built into Inspect and putting them into the dashboard here, and it would accomplish a lot of that similar kind of dynamic aggregation from the player level
Yeah.
to look at insights of progression or yeah.
Yeah. We actually we had a discussion around that with Jimmy because we like Dave and I were actually a part of like some of the interviews that Jimmy did in designing that tool. So we're definitely very familiar with his work. And we had a
Yeah.
brief conversation with him around that piece of the data. Um, I think a lot of what his stuff did, like he was going straight from the event level data, whereas we were coming from like the opposite direction of starting at that population level, and now we're thinking about how to work our way backwards. So I think at some point, there's definitely a point
Interesting.
where those should sort of converge, and we should be able to say, yeah, we could totally incorporate the things that Inspect does. Um, but yeah, it's just a matter of when we get to a point where we've sort of worked down to the level of working with event data, which is going to be its own interesting thing because those event files get so darn huge.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
there's going to be
Interesting.
a question of how to manage the size of that. Um, but yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be really cool to merge the work that we've done here with the kinds of things Jimmy's been working on.
Kind of to my point about the bar graphs not being the same, is it possible to have them share a y-axis scale
I think in
across these
principle it should
cells?
be. Like it's not something that we've done yet. We would probably have to think about um, user experience, user like how that would fit into how we're thinking about configuration and the level of independence between the different like the individual charts. But
Hmm.
like in principle, that's something that absolutely should be doable, and it's definitely on our list of like things that we want to think about as in terms of polish and making sure that you can represent the data side by side in a way that is useful.
I would actually probably make that a reasonable default for plots that are from a common data set, like do that by default and then have a setting to turn it off.
Sure.
Because otherwise you're going to lead people, particularly if this is a tool for people that aren't
Sense.
deeply data literate, you're going to
Yeah.
want to make a lot of decisions for them so that they
Yeah.
don't misinterpret shapes and trends and size and stuff.
That makes sense, yeah. And you could dynamically scale, for instance, to the height of the biggest bar across whatever the charts are. So in this case, that would probably be that, what is that, 81 from the quit level.
Yeah.
So every chart would have a maximum of 81, and you could just kind of see the breakdown for everything, apples to apples,
Yeah.
um,
Um,
something
so
like
I'm,
that.
so I'm thinking about, like, I think something that also might be worth thinking about, particularly if you are thinking about building on this, turning into some kind of research contribution or something down the line. Like Jupyter Notebook isn't really the right order of magnitude of analysis or comparison for this kind of thing. What you really want to be thinking about is like Matplotlib, Seaborn, Altair. Like that's the thing that actually does viz. Notebook is just the thing that it lives inside. Um, and those do a lot of this kind of like reasonable defaults of comparing multiple plots and making a lot of assumptions on the part of a user to try and avoid things like misinterpretation of information visualization. There's a lot of research in InfoVis space around that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Is this based on what is it like D3 under the hood, or
Yeah, it is.
have you looked at Vega?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I've heard about Vega and Vega Lite.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we chose D3 because it's more like the industry standard. And I believe D3 offers more control at the code level. Vega is like you said, it made a lot of good decisions already for you. So we can definitely like look at ideas in Vega and apply them here too.
I forget also what the guys that work on D3, they have a new thing. Forget the name of it.
Like a new framework or
Yeah, like a new framework.
hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I can look into that. Yeah, maybe not at the moment, but
Another thing that could be interesting for avoiding misinterpretation, that thing we ran into at the very beginning where the 847 was different than the bar charts because they came from
yeah.
two different data sets. If there was some way to tell the dashboard that like these two data sets are related in a
Mhm.
certain way,
yeah, like if
like
there's
do this sanity check.
like if there was like
Um,
a ring, like a colored outline for things that are from the same data set or something. I don't know, but
Mhm.
maybe, yeah. Yeah.
because on
Yeah.
this, all those top one, well, it's the bottom one obviously is a different data set. You can even see the name. That makes sense.
Yep.
And then the three across in the middle, they all say the same data set name.
Yep.
Uh, it's kind of unintuitive that the one in the upper right would actually be like cross filter compatible with the three, because I don't see how that's related other than like it looked like you made a new visualization, right, to get that first bar chart, the endurance one.
Mhm.
And so like why is it connected to the quit level? Cool that it can be, but where like I don't have an intuition as to why those ones are available for cross filtering. But then the count is somehow different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so like where those relationships are and what is compatible for impacting other charts.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth considering, especially depending on like I think we've got a bigger, like a broader question of how we want to think about moving between the different levels of aggregation. Uh, and like, is that still always going to be like charts next to each other, or is there going to be some sort of a notion of a mode or a zooming in or a zooming out? And I think that if the answer to that ends up being everything's just always on the same dashboard together, then yeah, absolutely, there's a lot of work to do on distinguishing those levels and what is compatible with filtering across each other. Um, for what it's worth, like I think, as far as like the intuitiveness or unintuitiveness of the like naming of the data sets at the top, um, another thing we can consider there is right now, like everything has a default chart title, which is just like the data set. Um, and I think that the three at the top, we've just custom filled in our own name
uh,
for that chart, for that specific um visualization. So like the default is that you'd always see the data set name and that there is that connection to make. That's still not the most intuitive way to do that. Um, so yeah, definitely something that we'll take into account and be thinking about.
that's nice that you can customize those titles there. I think that's
mhm.
yeah.
I think also like probably some of that would require like a user study and a broader sense of like what this is for.
Yeah.
So like personally, all visualization is ephemeral. Because that's what I use it for, right? I'm doing like exploratory data analysis. I'll throw together this thing to understand my data, and then I'll just like delete this document and never need it again. Um, Whereas if it's more like, is this a dashboard I go back to weekly for like the 5-year lifespan of my game? Sure, yeah, I'm gonna want to change these things and set them and put specific stuff and rename everything and bring it to the design team. But like, I would never want to do that personally. So like, it's like, who is it for? What are they going to use it for? Um,
Have you guys used this personally yet, or with others, like in design? Or I'm curious where you're
Yeah,
at.
yeah. So we've done I think 1 or 2 sessions. I think we've looked at some of the Bloom data with the game design team. We've got a new game in development where this tool is going to be reasonably heavily used in helping with, while the game is still being developed, looking at initial data that we get from play tests. And so that's going to be the first like stress test of the work with game design people. And that's been sort of the
Nice.
focus of this particular, like the way that we've presented this today. There's some other features that we've worked on that are oriented more towards like a researcher persona.
Like the language comparison.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so like those we've had an initial round of some interviews with some other researchers in the open game data community to sort of look at this tool, sort of do a little walkthrough and ask questions, respond to specific questions for their particular use cases. Uh, and so that kind of like user study work is underway on the supporting researcher side of this tool. Um, yeah, and then it's been a lot more of
Very
like
cool.
sessions similar to what we've kind of tried to demo here of sit down and ask some questions broadly, though ephemeral, like explore the data, try to get a rough answer to some questions from the game design team so that they know which parts of the game to think about more or to ask more questions about when they do play tests. And that's kind of where this sits, I think, on those sort of 2 axes of understanding our users.
Very cool. Thank you.
mhm. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Um,
thank you all for coming
You
to
hang, you had.
another. Or go ahead.
Oh, I just
Oh
had
yeah,
this.
were there
Yeah,
any
one
last
last
thoughts?
slide.
No, yeah.
Yeah, so we do have a live demo hosted. So for those of you who are interested in trying it out, definitely feel free to do so. And then I also included links to our Open Game Data main website. And if you have any questions or feedback, and if you want to just maybe brainstorm on how you could potentially apply this tool to your research or game development, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us either to my email or over at Slack, and then we can talk more about that. And thank you guys so much for being here and
Cool.
check out this. Yeah.
So
Really
thanks
cool work.
all
Thank you for sharing.
for another opening office hours. We do not have anything scheduled on the timeline for the foreseeable future. I might circulate a new poll to find a different time for the summer. Just because everybody's schedules are probably different now, and we could maybe pick something that maybe works for more people. But I'll keep you all posted. But if not, the plan for now is in 2 weeks to just do an open session unless somebody comes up with something they want to talk about.
Cool.
All
Awesome.
right.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us. And hopefully in like, I don't know, a couple months or however long it takes, we might come back and do another one of these for experimental LLM integration with this tool, which is
Oh,
another thing
cool.
we've been playing around with. Yeah.
All right. See y'all.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.